You're listening to Season 5 of the Devoted Dreamers podcast. Welcome, Dreamer. I'm so glad you're here. I'm your host, Merritt Ansa, and this is the podcast where we talk about our God-shaped dreams, the ones we're pursuing, hoping to pursue, or waiting on God to reveal. I don't know you yet, but I hope to, and my hope with this podcast is to help you move from uncertainty to action so that your life might sing, that it might sing praises to God for your good and His glory, because He made you for big things. But the more I talk with women about their dreams, the more I understand there's a battle within. Is it okay to be ambitious, to dream, to do something with our skills, gifts, and experiences? If you're struggling with this, don't listen to me. Go read God's Word, specifically Ephesians 1, and let the God of the universe remind you that you were chosen for a purpose, in order that you might live for the praise of His glory. Sure, you might feel some fear, anxiety, insecurity walking forward in your dream, but don't let those things stop you. We all feel them to some extent, and you cannot let those feelings, or the voices that tell you you have no business dreaming this dream, you cannot let them win, because you are a daughter of the King. And that's why we're having this conversation. I pray it's what you hear today in this episode. Thank you so much for joining in. As always, you'll find the show notes at merrittansa.com/podcast. And please connect with me and the community of devoted dreamers in our Facebook group or over on Instagram at merrittjo. And now, here's today's episode. Hello, devoted dreamers, and welcome. This is episode 118. And today is my birthday, and I'm so excited to get a chance to introduce you to a woman that I've been following for a little while and been getting to know over the last few months a bit better. Today's guest is Esther Littlefield. And if that name sounds familiar, you maybe have listened to her podcast called the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. And there she and her co-host, they encourage and equip women to embrace their God-given gifts, skills, and passions in order to lead with confidence. And so how appropriate is it that she is coming on the podcast today to talk to us dreamers and share her story of what she's learned of pursuing her God-shaped dream. Esther, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Merritt. I'm so happy to be here with you.
I am too. And I should have mentioned, you and I are both ones on the Enneagram. So you're a 1 wing 2 and I'm a 1 wing 9. So there are some, nuances there that are different, but
yes,
I relate to so much of what you post.
I know. Whenever we comment on Instagram, I'm always like, yeah, I agree with you, Merritt.
As hard as it is to be a 1. But anyway, I'm so glad you're here. And would you kick us off and just tell us about your God-shaped dream?
Okay. Yeah. So I feel like maybe I have more than one. Can I share more than one thing?
Totally. Absolutely.
Okay. So my kind of scary dream that I have just more recently started talking about is that I really want to write a book. And I have a story to share, and it's a book that's really been on my heart since I was a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of the dream that I know God has given me that I'm going to do. I'm not exactly sure when, but that is probably the one that scares me the most. And then my overall dream for my life, I would say, is really to help people to understand and know God's love and faithfulness, and to be a light in the world around me. I've always wanted to have my light shine, have Jesus' light shine through my life and be an influence to people around me. So yeah, it's kind of, that and the book hopefully will be part of that overall dream.
Yeah. And your podcast for sure.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So exactly. Yeah. The podcast definitely plays a role in that too.
I really want to thank you for mentioning the dream that scares you and the one you haven't started yet. I mean, it sounds like you've really maybe been thinking about it for a long time, but
Hmm.
haven't taken steps yet.
Yeah. I think I've taken steps in the sense of I have been writing. I just haven't been writing the
Oh,
book. I had I've been writing since as long as I can remember. I've always loved
mhm.
writing, and again, I've known that story probably needs to be in a book sometime. But I've written on my blog for many, many years. I've actually had a blog for over 12 years and very sporadically for a long time, but then more consistently in the more recent years. And then now with the podcast, that's essentially what the blog is now. But I've been writing, and then starting the podcast was certainly part of that journey too, because I knew if I want to write a book, I need to have people who will want to read it. And
Mhm.
so a podcast is an amazing way to connect with people who may want to eventually read a book that you write. So
Yeah,
that's part of that
totally.
story too. So
That's
I've
great.
taken steps, but I haven't actually started physically writing the actual book yet.
Great. Great point, though, that the steps aren't just in the writing of the book. There's the
Yeah.
other things that come before, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, do you want to talk about your podcast a little bit and share what that's all about?
Sure. Yeah. So I started the podcast in July of 2018, and I knew in January of 2018 that I wanted to start a podcast, and I knew I wanted it to be related to leadership for Christian women because I was just finding a lot of really amazing podcasts out there about leadership. And I was finding a lot of amazing podcasts about faith and about motherhood for Christian women. But the leadership podcasts were mostly men, mostly pastors, which I absolutely love and respect them. But as a pastor's wife and as a woman in ministry leadership and a woman who's run her own business for many years, I was just finding that there were some things that are unique to women in
Yeah.
leadership roles. And I wasn't finding very much out there in the Christian space that addressed those topics. And so I really felt that was where God was leading me at that point to say, okay, um, this is a need. And then it's also something that I'm passionate about. And so I started the podcast with my co-host, as you mentioned, Holly, who is a good friend of mine. And yeah, we started it just with the goal of encouraging women to really embrace their gifts, because for many years I held back on my gifts. I think I was afraid to really put myself out there in what I truly felt like God had gifted me in. I was fearful about just embracing them, fearful about going forward and using them or even acknowledging them. And so that's part of my passion with the podcast, is to help women acknowledge how God has made them, how God has wired them, the gifts he has given them, and that they can use those gifts in whatever place they're in right now. They don't have to be in a official leadership role to hopefully to resonate with the podcast or to use their gifts, because I believe we can be used wherever we are in whatever
Mm.
place we are in, just like you do, I know. So yeah, so that's a little bit about the podcast and kind of the purpose behind it. And it's been a lot of fun. So
Mm. Well, and you mentioned being fearful. So,
yeah.
if you don't mind, I would
Yeah.
love to dig into that a little bit more,
Okay.
especially this month of May. My theme is about fear, and that fear, I'm learning, the more women I talk to, that it's really common,
Mm,
that almost everybody says they have some sort of fear about stepping out
yeah,
into something bigger, but that fear is not from God, at least not this kind of fear.
yeah,
So, anyway, talk about what that fear has looked like for you and how it kept you back, and then how
sure.
it,
Yeah.
how you moved forward through it.
Okay. So I think it really starts back in my childhood. I was, I am an introvert. So I've always been very, very introverted. And I was extremely shy as a child. I wouldn't talk to anyone unless they talked to me first. I had very low self esteem, a lot of insecurity, never really felt like I fit in with my friends, just always felt different, and I think everybody at some point experiences that, but it was kind of throughout my whole childhood experience. And we moved a lot, and so it was hard to really get into a place where I felt connected with friends and all of that during those years. And I think I just through the years still have had that, and gradually have grown out of that. Thankfully, God has put me into positions where I've had to step out and I've had to become comfortable with speaking publicly and putting myself out there. But the fear, I think, in regards to using my gifts came even still as an adult. I guess I always second guessed myself and I really wondered, you know, I was always very good at school. I was, able to succeed academically, but then when it came into the spiritual world and faith, I didn't feel like I had something to offer, I guess. And so really, I would say where I started to overcome that fear was probably about 6 or 7 years ago. I had been to a women's retreat and I had a group of friends who were kind of newer to faith. And I had been involved in Bible studies and been doing Bible studies on my own for years, but I never led a Bible study. And I felt like God was saying, okay, why don't you start a study? Why don't you start leading this group of women that I've put around you? And I was like, wait a minute. No, you don't want me. Why are you asking me to do this, God? Like, there must be somebody else who can do this. And it just didn't seem like there was anyone else. Like, all these other women were really new to their faith, or some of them were not even sure. I don't even know if they were believers yet. And so I decided to just take that step and put myself out there and say, okay, I'm going to try and use this gift of, what God has taught me and leadership, and be able to influence these other women. And so I did that, started that small group. I think we started with 5 or 6 women, and it became one of the richest experiences of my life. And of all of those women, like, God worked in ways that we never could have imagined. I saw marriages restored. I saw women who had prayed for children become pregnant. I saw women who completely had no understanding of God or faith come to have really, really solid faith. And that was kind of the beginning of me realizing, okay, when you let go of fear of what people are going to think, or of what, of just thinking that you have to have it all together, or you have to be qualified in some way to serve God. When you let go of that fear, then you let God take over and you let God do the work, then things are so much more amazing than what they ever could be if you just orchestrated it all yourself. And so that step led me to say, okay, I'm going to start putting myself out there more. I'm going to start being more proactive about using the gifts that God has given me, about sharing my story, about really just speaking up when I feel like there's things to be spoken up about, whether it's in my church, in teams that I'm a part of, or things like that. And yeah, I think it's just been one step after another that has allowed me to get to a place. I wouldn't say that I'm completely unfearful now, but I just care a whole lot less at this point of what other people might think, as long as I know that I'm following what God is putting in front of me. I'm do my best to stay focused on that and not on what I might think other people are thinking.
Yeah. And what you just said about how that one choice, I mean, it really was a choice.
Yeah.
God was making it clear to you that there was an opportunity and you could say yes or no. And you
Yep.
said yes. And it opened up this, like, almost like you could see differently, right? That
Yeah.
like things just started to look different in how you lived your life. And that's so beautiful. I've totally experienced that too. And I
Yeah.
really believe that that is it's an opportunity he gives us, and we can say yes or no
Hmm. Yeah.
and see what he does when we say yes.
Exactly. Yeah. And maybe if I had said no, maybe he would have raised up someone else to do that.
Sure. Yeah.
But the way I see it is I don't think God needed me to do that. I think that I got to be part of what he was doing, what he wanted to do. And so yeah, that's my perspective is now when I think about it, I think, okay, here's an opportunity. If it's something that God is putting on my heart, I don't think that I'm necessarily going to be punished if I don't do it or anything like that. But I think, man, what am I going to miss out on if I
Yeah,
don't move forward in this? And I've
totally.
really seen the same thing with starting the podcast. Like I was fearful about starting the podcast. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know if anybody was going to want to listen, all those
Mhm.
things that you think about when you take a step and you create something. It's scary and it's very vulnerable because you are putting yourself out to the world, and lots of people might not like what you have to say or what you're doing. Um, but God, he has a better plan, and he knew what he was going to bring. And it's been that experience too has been such a rich blessing for me. Just to be able to do the podcast has been a blessing. So I've seen
Yeah.
it in more ways than one.
Has it um has it given you like new insight about what could be next? Or because I feel like when we kind of try something new, even if it's not something like this, like I started cooking sourdough bread or baking sourdough bread, and I was like, oh, I never knew this was a thing I could do, like, and so it
Hmm.
opened my mind up to other things that I could begin to think about and dream of. Like, have you had any of that kind of thing happen?
I don't know if I would say I've had that specifically around the podcast. I think that it has just given me more confidence in stepping out in whatever God might open, whatever door he might open next. Um, and
Yeah.
yeah, like knowing that the book is something I want to do at some point. Like I know that I need to do it, and it's not up to me what the results are. It's just going to be up to me to do it. And I think I've seen that God's way of bringing the results is a lot of times different than what we expect. And it's most
Mm,
of the time way better than what we expect. So
totally.
I think that I just have that kind of confidence in my heart that I know that
Mm.
if there's something he's giving me to do, and I just need to be obedient and then let him do what he wants to do with that.
Well, so along those lines, have there been any verses of scripture that have kind of been a foundation or a support for you as you've taken some of these steps?
So many scriptures have been an encouragement to me through the years. But yeah, the one that I'm kind of clinging to right now is Philippians 1:6 that says, "And I am sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ."
Mm.
And there's a lot of things, even when I think about that Bible study that I started, there's a lot of really amazing things that have happened from that. But then there's been a few things that have been really hard. Um, and there's been some things in my own life that I haven't seen an answer to prayer, or I haven't seen God work in a way that I would like. And I I find that holding on to that promise that he's going to continue the work, he's going to bring it to completion. Um, Again, it's a reminder that it's not up to me
Mm.
to bring the results, because as an Enneagram 1, as someone who likes to have control, that's probably my biggest struggle in life is surrendering to God and letting him do what he wants and not being the one in charge.
Mm.
And so the verse is just a reminder that all I need to do is be faithful to him, and then he is going to do what he wants, and he's going to bring the results. And I don't have to figure out exactly how it's all going to happen.
Yeah. And he's good. So you know that whatever the results are, it's going to be for your good, right?
Yeah, right.
Even if you don't like it.
Yeah, right. And it doesn't always feel that way when you look at circumstances. It doesn't always feel that way, and but yes, holding on to the fact that I know his character and I know the faithfulness that he's always shown me in my entire life. When I look back, I just see that he's always been faithful. So that I have no reason to question him. I still do, but I really don't have any reason to. And I have to remind myself of that.
Well, I would love to hear, you guys talk about so many great topics on your podcast, and you've shared a lot of great wisdom here. I'd love to hear what advice you would give to other women who maybe are currently in that place that you were of having a decision to make, or, do I follow this thing that I feel completely incapable of doing? What would you say to her?
Yeah. I think I would just say to start small, that obedience is God usually doesn't ask us to do one humongous thing all at once, He usually just asks us to do one small thing, and then he sees how we respond to that. And then from there, there's another small thing, and then maybe a little bit bigger thing. And I think that's how I've seen my whole life play out, is that there's been just one small step of obedience after another. And of course, lots of non-steps that I haven't taken. But I always go back to the story of Abraham, and how when God gave Abraham the promise of the future, it didn't make any sense to Abraham, and because he had no evidence of the promise in front of him. But then he told him to go and to leave his country and to go to this other place. And again, he didn't have the map of the whole journey. He didn't have, here's what I'm going to do today, and here's what I'm going to do 6 months from now, and then 3 years from now, you're going to have this. All he said was go. And Abraham just did it. He took that step of obedience. So I try to go back to that and remember, again, take that small step. You're not going to see the whole path. You're not going to know exactly what's going to come next. But it's so much better if you just take that step than if you keep holding back or not moving forward because you're not 100% sure that this is the exact right path for your entire life,
Yeah, totally. Well, and like you just said, it's a small step. So even if it's the wrong one, or you go in a direction that shouldn't have gone, but that was maybe a little bit tweaked half a degree or something, it's not going to be the end of the world. And at least in my life, I feel like God has kind of course corrected me on stuff like that, where just those little nudges where, I've walked forward and not died.
Yes, right. Yeah. I've had that experience. And one of the things that I remember is when my husband and I were first married, we were serving in the youth ministry at our church. So we were volunteering, and then my husband became the youth pastor. And somewhere in there, it was before I had my daughter, there was a women's ministry program starting up, and there was a specific type of thing that they were going to be doing. And I offered to help with it. I felt like God was saying, do this, put yourself out there, offer to help. And I offered to help, and I wasn't selected to be part of that program. Mm-hmm. And it was very disappointing and very crushing at the time because I was like, what is wrong with me? Why didn't I get to be part of this? Mm-hmm. But then now looking back, I realized I was totally not prepared for that role. There was no way that I was in a place spiritually, mentally, emotionally, to be able to be doing that particular ministry. And I think God was protecting me from being in a place that would have not been healthy for me. And then God brought me into a different place, like I said, years later, of leading a women's group, and that group growing and multiplying and lots of other amazing things. But at the time, it felt like, I probably was taking a misstep because I was getting ahead of God, but God directed me. God directed me to where he wanted me to go.
Yeah, absolutely. He is faithful.
Yeah.
Well, would you share any of like the books or podcasts or things that have been resources that would be helpful to listeners that you've really enjoyed?
Yes, I am a huge podcast addict, so I will try not to share too many. Actually, I just have one that I think specific to this topic is helpful. It's the Next Right Thing by Emily P. Freeman. I just love that podcast for decision making. And I think for someone who tends to overthink things or get stuck in your own head or be held back by fear, I think it's a really great podcast to just help you do the next right thing, which is, again, taking that one baby step. And then I also read the book Restless by Jenny Allen a few years ago, and that was really life-changing for me. It really was one of the factors in kind of shifting a lot of how I was spending my time, how I was really focusing my career and my work, came out of that book, and God reminding me of like what he wanted me to be doing. And then I also love the book Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less by Greg McKeown. I'm not sure how to say his name, but that book isn't necessarily a faith-based book, but it really is about kind of getting down to the core of what you should be doing with your life and how you're spending your time. And that, I think, one of my issues has been trying to do everything and trying to be all things to all people, and always wanting people to be pleased. I kind of mentioned this before, but wanting to be liked or wanting people to approve of what I was doing. I think that's part of what often held me back with fear, was if people didn't like what I was going to do, I didn't want to do it. So anyway, this book really helped me to make some tough decisions with my time and my life. And again, move me closer to doing really what I'm sensing God leading me to.
Those are awesome. That is a great list. I think Restless was similarly impactful in my life. Like,
yeah,
it just spoke to me where I was at, and such a good book.
Yes. I love all of Jenny Allen's stuff, actually, but Anything, actually, the book Anything also was definitely impactful for me. Again, with kind of that surrender thing of saying, okay, God, I will do anything, like really, which is definitely very scary to say, but ultimately it's what he wants. So. Yeah.
Well, I know that you had a couple things you wanted to share with the listeners, just ways that you provide support to women leaders and women who might one day be leaders. Can you talk about those?
Yeah, sure. So I have a free, I call it the Confident Leader Manifesto, and it's kind of just my take on affirmations, but biblically based around how we can embrace our gifts and embrace the leadership roles that he's put us in. So anybody who wants to grab that can get that at estherlittlefield.com/confident. And that, again, it's just a free download where you can have that in front of you, read it. You could always tweak it to what, change the wording up for yourself, but it's kind of a starting point for us to embrace how God has wired us and how he's made us, etc. And then I do have something called the Confident Leader Club, which is for women who want to become stronger leaders, gain accountability, and enjoy ongoing training in a community of Christian women. So that's my membership, where we have monthly trainings that I provide on different topics, as well as just really fun stuff happening in there, like a book club and other support amongst leaders. So you can find out about that at confidentleaderclub.com.
Awesome. And I will put both of those in the show notes so that people can easily access.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing those. Gosh, Esther, this has been really fun and encouraging. And I feel like every time I read the stuff that you write online, whether that's Instagram or via your blog, I just do feel like you have the heartbeat of women in leadership, in your heart. Like that's what I see you doing what God has called you to do. It's really fun. And I would just love to have you close us out by talking about how the experience of stepping out in faith and saying yes to those little baby steps, and then pursuing God's dream for your life, how has that changed you?
So I think that it has changed me in a lot of ways. One thing is that I've just seen that it's given me more trust in God. Like I mentioned before, I have seen his faithfulness through my life, and I've never had reasons to doubt him, even though I have had some pretty difficult experiences. He's always been faithful. And so stepping out and starting to pursue the dreams that he's put on my heart, and again, the way I've seen him use those steps and that I've been able to be a part of that, it's just helped my faith to grow even more and to give me more trust in his faithfulness and in him, in what he can do. And to see not only what happens when I'm obedient, but then when I get to see other women stepping out and being obedient, it's amazing to be a part of that. I think it's also given me more confidence in myself, and not in my own abilities, but in how God has made me, and that I am not broken in the sense of how God created me was on purpose. He created me with all of my unique gifts and skills and passions and things that I used to be afraid of or, I always remember being told I was too sensitive. And then I also have often thought of myself as too critical because I can see the mistakes in anything that I look at. And going through this experience has reminded me and shown me that no, actually God, he's told me, I've made you this way. You have these things. There's nothing wrong with you. You need to use those gifts and those unique personality traits to honor me, and so that's given me confidence in the way he's wired me and the fact that I can take those things and use them for his glory. And then I think the third thing that I've gotten and experienced from this is that I just feel more fulfilled in my life and in my work when I'm doing what is in alignment with his will, and when I'm fully using the gifts that he's given me, I am having a lot more fun and I'm not as stressed out. And I spent a lot of my years in my work, especially doing the things that I thought everybody else wanted me to do. And, hitting all the marks, but not actually, a lot of the times not actually enjoying it. And I don't think that you're going to necessarily enjoy every moment of pursuing your dream, your God-shaped dream, but there's certainly going to be hard things, but I think you will be more fulfilled and you will experience a lot more joy when you are pursuing that, what God has given you to do, rather than pursuing what you think other people are looking for or wanting from you.
If you have ever wondered how to tackle the fear standing in the way of your dream, this was the episode for you. And Esther showed us exactly how to do that. Did you catch it? So many of the themes in this conversation echo what I feel like the Devoted Dreamers podcast is all about, and what I want you to hear about finding the courage to pursue your God-shaped dream. I knew Esther would have so much wisdom and life experience to share, but what I didn't know about was what a reminder this conversation would be of God's faithfulness, which is super fun, since that's the phrasing she used to talk about her God-shaped dream. She's doing it. Do you see it? So here are a few of my other takeaways from talking with Esther. Takeaway number 1, at the very beginning, she said you can use your gifts in whatever place you're in. And we've heard that before, but whether that's in motherhood or a full-time job or serving in your church or community, you don't have to wait. You can start small. So pause a minute today and ask God what that small start might look like for you, especially if you're in a season of beginning or feeling like your life is really full. Ask Him, where am I already living, working, communicating that I could begin now in some small way? Okay, takeaway number 2. On deciding to take the leap to do something she felt ill-equipped to do, which was for Esther leading a Bible study. I loved that. I love that she took that step anyway, even though she was like, maybe I'm not the best person to do this. And the rewards that came out of leading that group, it was so fun to hear her talk about that and how God really used her willingness, and that it didn't mean that she had to be totally equipped, that He equipped her along the way and provided the group with what they needed from her and from Him. Okay, finally, takeaway number 3, that so much of this comes down to trusting His character, to believing that He's good and that He's for you. Because when you know that, it breaks down so much of the anxiety that builds up within us when we give in to fear. And it's funny, this has come up for me a bunch since talking with Esther. I have a 4-year-old daughter, and so often she pushes back when I'm asking her to do something, or, swimming in the pool, like she thinks I'm going to let her drown or something like that. And I just want to look at her and be like, do you trust me? Do you believe in the love that I have for you, that I would not allow, your head to go underwater and you just swallow a bunch of water and end up in a coma? I'm not going to let that happen. And it's been such a picture for me of how valuable it is to rest in God, to abide in Christ, to believe that what He has for you is good. Anyway, so grateful for this conversation with Esther. Thanks so much for listening in. And I wanted to let you know that I have some new patrons to the podcast. It's been really fun to watch you all step up and take on my challenge of giving $5 a month through my Patreon page. So in case you're new or you haven't heard of Patreon, it is this super cool way that creatives can build a community around the people who consume their content. And it's a way to get support for your work. So this is basically just a website where you can pledge your monthly support for me and the Devoted Dreamers podcast. And you can get some super cool things in return, depending on whatever level you want to join at. So this is a great time to get involved. As I mentioned, I have issued a challenge of, if the podcast has spoken to you, if you listen to one episode a month, if it's pointing you to Christ, if it is encouraging you towards your God-shaped dream, would you consider joining my team of monthly Patreon supporters with just a $5 gift? So $60 a year. It happens automatically every month, or there's a way that you can make a one-time gift as well on the page. Let me know if you need me to send you that link. I'd be happy to DM it to you. But it would mean so much to me and provides so much incredible support for the podcast, especially in this season of our family kind of being in a bit of tumultuousness with our financial situation. So I'm so grateful that you all would continue to enable me to produce this podcast. And my hope is with enough support that I would be able to hire some additional help so that I wouldn't be up at 1 a.m. every week posting the podcast. It doesn't happen every week, but just real talk with you that some weeks that happens. I could really use the help. Anyway, thank you so much to those of you who give on a regular basis. And if you are interested in giving, you can find that page at patreon.com/devoteddreamerspodcast. And if you're looking for ways to connect with other dreamers and other listeners of the podcast, we would love to meet you over in the Facebook group. This is a great place to find community with like-minded women who love Jesus, who believe he's put a dream in their heart. And there, it's a great place to share your challenges, your successes, to ask for help, to present something that you're like ready to go live with, but you want a little bit of feedback on, like whatever it is that you're working on, or wherever you are emotionally or mentally with this whole concept of a God-shaped dream. We would love to see you over in the Devoted Dreamers Insiders group. Okay, so you'll find the show notes for this episode at meritance.com/podcast/118. There you can connect with Sweet Esther, get links to all the resources she recommended, her free biblical affirmations for Christian women leaders, and the link to her Confident Leader Club. That's it for today. Thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. And wherever you are with your God-shaped dreams, may you have the courage to take one step toward their realization today. I will see you next week for my next solo episode. Bye-bye.